Thank you, Sue, for that introduction. My name is Debbie Wagoner, as Sue said, and I am the Deputy Director of the Small and Medium Business Group at Widget. And today we're going to be looking at Unanet expense report. We're going to start out with an overview. We're going to talk about expense report settings, credit card imports, per diem tables, expense report entries, attaching receipts, void and copy functionality, reporting, and some remember to-dos. First thing is expense report settings. The two most important things when you're dealing with expense reports are expense types and the mapping of those expense types. So there's a couple different places where you can map your expense types. The first one obviously is in the expense type screen. And you can, for each project type, you can map a general ledger account. The second screen where you can do your expense type mapping is the project type screen. In this screen, for each project type, as an example, maybe you have a fringe account or a fringe project type, you can map all your fringe accounts for the expense types in that one screen. And then if you go to billable, you can map all your direct charge account numbers for your expense types in that screen. The second area that's super important for mapping is to make sure that your expense types are mapped to your cost elements. If you don't do this, you're going to have unmapped costs on your job cost reports, and those are sometimes not super easy to fix. So you want to make sure that you get those expense types mapped to the cost element. Expense type wizards, when you're setting up your expense types, there are some settings that will control how your wizards perform. And one of the new features is when you have a mileage expense type and it's mapped to the mileage wizard, there's a link to Google Maps, so you can put your from and to destination, and it will tell you exactly what the mileage should be. Under admin properties, there are several settings for expense types. Locked on completion, this just means that once an expense report has been approved, it automatically goes into a locked status, so the employee cannot edit it. Enable credit card functionality. If you're going to import expense items from your credit card statement into the expense report, you have to turn that functionality on. And a subset of that enable credit card functionality is to allow users to delete imported transactions and purge imported transactions older than user defined, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. Also on the expense report itself, you can choose to show the project org, which is your customer, show the project title, or hide project type. Now, when thinking about what you're going to see as far as the project information, if you show the project org, you're also going to see the project number or project code. So if you also show the project title, that field's going to be pretty big and it might be a little busy for your employees. So just think about what you want to see on those expense reports. Allow expense reports to be copied. This is an important feature, especially if you're ever going to void any expense reports. You can copy the original and make whatever changes you need to. Require location and require purpose. Typically the required purpose, the DCA likes to have that on there because you can explain why these expenses occurred and satisfy their need for the purpose of the trip or the expense. Require comments if threshold is exceeded. When you're setting up your expense type, you can enter a threshold. And if you exceed that threshold, if this checkbox is checked, you have to put a comment in as to why you exceeded that threshold. Limit expenses to one project. Some people like to put all of their expenses on one expense report regardless of the project, and then others like to have just a single project per expense report. So that setting will determine if you can have more than one project on your expense report. Credit card imports. This is a very nice feature. To begin with, obviously we have to have that functionality turned on in the property settings, but also you have to have the credit card information set up in the people profile. So I'll walk you through how to do that when we get to our demo. Most all credit cards, you can go into the bank's web portal and download those transactions, either in a CSV file or an Excel file. Once you have exported that information from your bank, then there's just 4 columns on the credit card template that you need to copy that data into. So your credit card number that matches what is in your people profile, transaction date, bill amount, and vendor name. Once you have the credit card information imported, and you do that through admin import and then choose credit card generic, you can go to admin imported expenses and take a look at all of those expenses that were imported. Sometimes you might not catch it and you'll import a payment row, so you can delete that row if need be in that view imported expenses. Per diem tables. If you're doing travel and you're going to use the GSA per diem rate, then you have to update those rates in Unanet. You can find those rates at support.unanet.com. If you don't already have a login, you can contact your customer success manager and they will help you with the login information for this site. Once you're in the site, enter per diem in the search bar, and on the right-hand side, look for the articles, related articles, and you're going to look for the ones that say CONUS and OCONUS, the M&IE breakdown table for both. When you click on those links, it'll open an article, and at the bottom of the article will be the actual per diem file. So go ahead and download that file for CONUS and OCONUS if you need both. Once you have them downloaded and saved somewhere on your computer or your network, you can import those using admin import per diem rate. You will have to run it twice because you have to run CONUS and then OCONUS separately. Table update information is found in your monthly customer newsletter. If you don't get a monthly customer newsletter in your email, please contact your customer support person and they will be able to sign you up for that newsletter. Attaching receipts to your expense report. Obviously a big deal. The government requires receipts for various expenses. So you can attach those receipts, and pretty much any file type is acceptable. Let's say, for example, that you used your cell phone, took pictures of the receipt. That might be a JPEG file, it might be some other kind of file. Or if you decided to copy and paste all your receipts onto a Word document or an Excel document, any file type is acceptable. This is fairly new. I believe it came out last year. We have the void feature, which is a lifesaver. Once your expense report has been either locked or extracted, you can go in and void that expense report, and the system automatically creates an exact opposite of that expense report. So it'll back all those expenses out exactly as they have been entered. Once you've voided something, if you need to copy the old expense report into a new expense report and just make a couple changes, maybe the project is wrong, maybe the amount was entered incorrectly, then you can copy that existing expense report that was voided and just make those edits as need be. We're also going to talk about reports, expense reporting. The expense report status report is a nice report. There's two options. You can run it in summary or detail, and it will put if you run it in detail, it'll put a copy of the expense report right on the expense report status report. The expense details report shows what expenses were charged to your project. Imported card details shows what imported items were used on expense reports. And then also you'll be able to see your expense report costs on your project cost summary or JSR. And then lastly, the remember to. You have to extract your expense reports to be able to create your AP voucher, and I'll walk you through how to do that. If they aren't extracted, they won't show up in the Create AP Voucher screen, and that can be kind of annoying. Also, make sure that your approval groups are set up for expense reports, and I'll show you how to make sure that that is set up correctly. Also, if needed, set up your project level approvals. If you want your project managers to approve the expense reports that are charged to their project, you need to set up project level approvers, and in that you can choose whether or not you want the project manager to approve their expenses first and then the employee's manager, or it doesn't matter. So that's a choice that you can make in that screen. And then lastly, make sure expenses are turned on in your project. Sometimes people will set up projects that maybe one project is labor only and the other project is expenses only. Well, obviously in your labor only expense or project, you don't want expenses turned on, but in the expense project you do, and you wouldn't have time turned on. So just a couple tips to make your expense reports run smoothly. So now we're going to go into the system and we're going to look at these settings. So the first thing is if we go to our admin setup expense types, we've got our expense types set up. You can always add expense types by clicking plus expense type. But let's take a look at airfare. So we have airfare set up. We're requiring a receipt. We want to show the description, which is this right here, which really isn't necessary. And we're going to allow this expense type on expense request. We also have a threshold set up. So any time that an airfare is entered that is more than $850, it's going to flag that expense that it's over the threshold. And if we have the property setting turned on, it will also force the user to put in comments as to why it exceeded the threshold. So once we have the main part of the airfare set up, and let me go back. Here's where you select the wizard as well. So this has got an air wizard. So if we want to use the wizard, we just select it and save it. And under the other tab is just user defined fields that you can set up. You have up to 20 per user, per expense type. So a lot of information can be stored there. So if we go back to our expense type, the little piece of paper with the plus sign or the pencil is where you would map your cost account to that expense type. So for airfare, we've got G&A travel, B&P travel, direct travel, IR&D travel. If we had project types set up for overhead, G&A, any of those, we could map those accounts here. The other place that you can map accounts is your project type. So if I select B&P, pencil in, it gives me, whoops, I apologize, like the piece of paper with the pencil. It gives me all of my expense types so I can map them to the appropriate accounts here. This thing's usually probably a little bit easier. As an example, if you have a G&A project type, then you would just have to put in G&A accounts in this screen. So it makes it a little bit easier to code everything. But if you prefer doing an expense type, you certainly can. We talked about the wizards briefly, and now we're going to take a look at under admin setup. We're going to go to our cost structure and pencil into our cost structure and go to the ODC cost tab. So for every expense type that may be charged to a cost element, we need to map that item to the cost element. So as an example, if I move this back over and save it, no, I can't because it's already been used. This airfare would be over here on the right, and then I just scroll down to travel, select travel, and then move it over. So very simple, but you need to remember to do this. It's extremely important, especially for direct charges. So we're going to go to admin properties and look at the expense properties. So set expense reports to locked from completion. So as soon as your expense reports are approved, they would automatically go into a locked status and would not be able to be edited. Enable credit card functionality, and then allow administrators to delete imported or users to delete imported transactions, and then purge imported transactions that are older than X number of days. Under settings, project org code, do we want to see the customer? Do we want to see the project title as well as the project code? And do we want to hide project type? This is probably a good one to hide because your employees really don't care what the project type is. Allow expense reports to be copied. So you definitely want to check that box if you're going to use the void functionality. And then are we going to require a location, a purpose, and comments if the threshold is exceeded? And also the last one, limit expense reports to one project. If you want to only have one project on your expense report, check that box, and the system will not allow you to enter any additional projects. So now let's talk about credit cards. So under people, if we go into a person profile and go to credit cards, I can add a credit card, and this is Betty and Bev. Now, the important thing about this is this number field has to match what comes over from your credit card statement. If it doesn't, then you'll just have to manually map it to whatever these numbers are. But once you export your expenses from your credit card company, then you'll be able to see how the credit card number comes over, and then you can make this number match. So when you get your information from your credit card, it'll probably look similar to this. So it has the date, it has the description, it has the amount. Our credit card template is similar, but obviously just a little bit different. So if we take a look at this, we've got our credit card number, our transaction date, our bill amount, and our vendor name. So I'm going to copy this date information and paste it over here. And I would do the same with the bill information. And then I'm going to do the same with the vendor information. So all I have to worry about is the card number. Well, in this case, when I downloaded this, I didn't get a card number because there's just one card. If you have, as an example, American Express and everybody has a separate card, then there would be a separate identifier listed on your export. So the card number that I entered was 0759. So I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to save this file. So once I have that file saved, then I go to Admin, Import, here it is, Credit Card Generic. And I'm going to choose the file. And payment method. Am I going to record this as company paid, corporate card, or employee paid? So I'm going to select corporate card, and I'm going to import. So those 5 records were imported. So when I look at those records, I can go to my imported expenses and take a look at what was imported. Now, obviously, I imported this before. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these just so we don't get confused. Okay, so just the ones I just imported are in there at this point in time. So let's talk about per diem. So once you get those per diem files downloaded from the Unanet support site, you go into Import and then select per diem rates and then choose where your file is. You can choose to first purge what is out there originally and then just copy in what the file has on it now. Might be a good thing to do maybe once a year, just to make sure that you have the right information in the system. But again, remember that you're going to need to run this twice if you're going to update both CONUS and OCONUS. All right, let's go ahead and enter an expense report. So if I'm entering my own expense report, when I go to my home dashboard, I can go down to Add Expense and click the plus. If you're adding expense reports for somebody else, maybe you're an admin, then you would go to the People list and click on the little dollar sign, the dollar icon, and that will take you to their expense report screen, and then you can do plus expense. So I'm going to go back to my home page. Actually, no, I think I'm going to add one for somebody else. Click on the dollar, and I'm going to say plus expense. Okay, well that's not going to work. Okay, sorry about that. This is a demo site, and it's kind of, some of the data is kind of weird. So purpose. What is the purpose of our trip or our expenses? So I'm going to say travel to customer site or meeting. Where's the customer located? I'm going to say they're in I don't know how to spell Switzerland, obviously. Sweden. Let's go with Sweden. Now, I can do one project or I can do many projects. And make sure that your tasks are correct. Now, this allocation, if I have multiple projects, I can split the cost. I can make it 70-30, however the allocation needs to be. However, if each line of the expense report, you're going to decide which line goes to which project, then just ignore this allocation, and I'll show you in a minute how you can get around the allocation percentages. So once we have our purpose and location and our project set up, we can go to details, which brings us to our line items. New feature, attachments by line item. This is really exciting. This allows you to obviously attach receipts for each individual line item. You still have the option to just put everything on one document or multiple documents and attach it that way. But if you do need to attach something specific to a line item, that feature is now available. So I'm going to put 8.1 and airfare. So receipts required, so I need to check that box. I flew on United. I departed from Dulles, and I arrived in Sweden. And I left on the 1st, and I'm going to return on the 10th. Ticket number, and my ticket was $1,000. Now, I can save this, but when I go to save my expense report, it's saying I have to put in a comment as to why I exceeded the threshold. So if I click OK and I go back in here, trip was last minute, and tickets were expensive. So then we have our comments on here, and then we have our information. If we add another line item, we click this little hamburger thing. So in our allocation, if we're going to allocate this all to project number 1, we just select number 1. If we're going to allocate it all to number 2, we select number 2. So if we go back into our line items, 8.1 started our lodging, and again I have a wizard. So vendors required, and receipt is required. So we stayed at the Hilton starting on 8.1 for 9 nights, and we were in Sweden. Now, to get this list to populate, I have to click on the arrow. So it'll go out and find all of the places in Sweden that have per diem rates. So we stayed in Stockholm. Let's say that our hotel was $215 a night. So we have $171 in overage. So when I save this, it automatically adds a line for the overage. And whatever your lodging over per diem is mapped to, then that is what is going to be charged on your general ledger. if we add our meals per diem, then we get another wizard, and we have to say where we were, and $145 a day. It was a travel day, and I had breakfast and lunch on the airplane. So you see that it reduced the per diem down to just dinner. So instead of having to go in and add these days individually, I will go ahead and set up another day. And we're going to Sweden. And Stockholm, and I'm going to save that. So I can copy this and then just change the date if nothing else changed. So that's an easy way to list all of my per diem days instead of having to enter them one by one. So if I want to import my credit card, I exceeded the threshold for lodging, so I have to put a comment in there. So I couldn't find hotel or per diem rate. And we'll save that. So I have to attach receipts to airfare. So if I go in here, and I'm just going to attach anything, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to save that. And then my lodging per diem. I also have to attach a receipt. So I'll just attach that and save. And now it's happy. So then I can import my credit card expenses. It's saying there's nothing there. Okay. Okay, let me go here. People open in a different link. I think I forgot to set up the credit card information for myself. So I go in and pencil into my people profile, go to credit card, sure enough I didn't set it up. So we're going to do Chase, we're going to do Frank Controller, CEO 759, expires, and it's a Visa. All right. So now that I set my credit card up, I have a choice of importing or deleting these imported transactions. I do have to assign an expense type. So this was gas for my rental car. So rental car fuel. This was gas for my rental car. So rental car fuel. This was a meal. And this was RAM transportation. Taxi or shuttle. So then I just select which ones I want to import. So once I save this, so again, it's going to give me some errors. So wizard details must be provided for business meals. So business meals, if I click into business meals, who is there? Me and the client. 3 attended. And we're going to save that. And once I save this, that particular part of the error should go away, which it did. So now it's just saying I need to attach receipts for this information. So again, if I go in here to rental car fuel, choose file, and rental car fuel, choose file, And we lose our place, we can always say save. Okay, so we need to do business meals and so attach a receipt for that. And then our taxi and shuttle. So I have to find my Uber or Lyft receipt. And then our taxi and shuttle. Again, as you can see, it doesn't matter what file type I have selected, it will attach them. So my errors are gone. Now, these all came in as corporate card. This is employee paid. If this was a prepaid, I could change this to company paid. So right now the employee would get $32.90, but if this was company prepaid, you can see that it went down to $22.90. So the payment method is really important too, to know where these expense items get processed to. Example, if you've got your payment method for company paid set up to go against a prepaid account, then when we post this expense report, it would go against that account correctly. So I'm done with my expense report, so I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to submit it. I can put in comments to my manager or to my program person, or I can just click submit. Now my expense report, and see how this information shows up in the comments that we imported from the credit card and that we put in via the wizard. We can look at our approval history. So this tells me it has not been approved yet. I just submitted it. And then attachments gives you a list of all the attachments and tells you which line that the attachments are attached to. So let's talk about approvals. If I go back to my home dashboard, I've got some expense report approvals. I'm an alternate for expense report approvals, and I've got some I'm an alternate to my customers. These are project approvers, so I'm an alternate to the project person. So when I click into whatever queue, so here I can see that I've got an expense report outstanding. So you click the magnifying glass and either approve, approve next, or disapprove. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this. And so that expense report is now locked because we set that setting in there. So if I go back to my home dashboard, I've got all my active expense reports sitting here. I can go and look at my completed expense report. So let's go look at CFO Fran. So completed expense report, she doesn't have any. So let me pick somebody who does here. Charlie User does. Let's go look at his completed expense report. So here's a list of all his expense reports. So if I select this one, and I'm going to void it. So remember, it's $35.79. So when I click void, it puts an exact opposite out there. So if I take a look at the expense report, it has all my line items with the receipt, and it just puts in a negative amount to back out all of those expenses. So if I go back to Charlie User's expense report list, let's just say that maybe the project was wrong. So if I click the magnifying glass, I can say copy to report. It creates a new expense report for me that then I can edit the project, I can edit the date, the expense type, the amount. So it's a super easy way to fix timesheets, or I'm sorry, expense reports that may have had a problem. Okay, so let's talk about expense report reporting. So we go to Reports Dashboard, and the first report we're going to take a look at is expense report status. So on expense report status, I can filter this by name, I can filter it by approval group, by expense report number. I can choose what dates I want to see. So maybe I want to see by line item date, and I want to see all of my expense report statuses. Dates, I can do current year, I can do current quarter, current month, current day, whatever I want to do for dates. And then I have a choice of summary view or detail view. So I'm going to pick detail view, and I want to see the approval history and the attachment. So when I run this report, it gives me a summary list of the expense report. And then it also attaches a copy of the expense report along with the approval history and the attachment. So this is a handy report for program managers or the person's manager to be able to actually go out and look at the expense reports without actually having to go in and pull them up in the approval area or their own area. So yeah, this is the summary view, and then it adds all the expense reports for the detail view. Another report that's really important is our expense details. The expense details, you can pick a project or a range of projects that you may want to see the expenses for, and maybe I want to see this for the current year, and I want it for line item dates. And I want to list by maybe expense type. So when I run this, I'm going to see my expense type airfare first, customer 1, here's my project number, and then here are all the expense report expenses that have been charged to that expense type for that particular project. So it's kind of handy when you're trying to reconcile. You can run this report and see exactly what was charged. Another report is the imported credit card details. So again, by person, so I'm going to put my controller out here. I'm going to say show me for the current year. And I'm going to see Paul. So here are those items that I imported, and then it will tell you which expense report they were attached to. So that's another way to find out information from your expense report. Your project cost summary, or JSR, there's a choice. Go ahead and select my project. We're going to run it for the current month. There's a choice here to include posted data only. If I do this, then only posted expense reports are going to show up on my JSR. If I don't check it, then any expense report that is charged to this project, regardless of whether it's been posted or not, will appear on my JSR. And I'm going to use my line item details for my report. So when I run my JSR, here's my expenses. I can go to my ODC details, take a look at the actuals. So I've got airfare $96.50, and obviously they're included in my fiscal year to date. So if I go back to my criteria and I check that include posted data only and rerun this, if I go look at my actuals now, my airfare is only $8,700 because it didn't include any of those expense reports that weren't posted to the GL yet. So you have a choice of seeing up to a minute information, even if it's not posted, or just looking at your posted data. Okay, so for your Remember To items, the first one that we had was be sure to extract your expense report. So admin, export, list, and then you want to find expense. Super easy to do, just give it a file name. Let's say ERTSC. Check the box to extract them. I want them to post in October. And we're going to run the export. So we didn't have anything out there. Let's see, current year. We're going to run the export. I must have already exported everything. But that's how you get the expense reports into extracted status. And once you do that, when you go to financials, accounts payable, create vendor invoices from expense report, this is how you're going to be able to create those invoices, but you have to be extracted before you can run that process. Under admin setup and expense, we want to make sure that there are approval groups out there for expenses. And it looks like they set up separate approval groups for time versus expense. Do you have to do it that way? No. The only time that you would have to do it that way is if you had a different set of approvers for time versus expense. Otherwise, if I go into my approval groups, you can see that my time and expense is in the approval group. So I could add time submitters here and have my approvers. So just make sure that your approval groups are set up for expense, and you just have to make sure that there's expense report submitters listed here on the left, or on the right, sorry. If you need project level approvals, we go into our project and pencil in. We go to administrator and go to project approver. So right now we don't have a project approver for this project. So if we wanted to set it up to where it would require a project approver, let's see, say CFO Fran is going to be our project approver, and she's going to approve expense reports and time sheets that are charged to her project. We could also do vendor invoices, expense requests. Also, if you want CFO Fran, as Fran CFO, to approve the expense report or the timesheet that was charged to this particular project, first you would check this box. So the approval queue would go to Fran CFO first, and then it would go to the person's manager, whoever typically approves their expense report. If you leave this unchecked, then it will just go into a queue and it doesn't really matter who approves it first. So just if you want the project managers to approve it first, you want to make sure the box is checked and then save those changes. And then lastly, is we want to make sure that expenses are turned on our project. So here's our project profile, and under expenses, we want to make sure that allow expense reporting is on. And also keep in mind that this setting is also at the task level. So if I go in and look at my task level, I want to make sure that allow expense reporting is turned on. Now this says to use project setting. My project setting says expenses are allowed, so that'll flow down to my task. If I want to limit it by task, then I can either change it to yes or no for each individual task, and the system will look here first for permissions. So I hope that was informative. If you have any questions, please give us a holler. Let me bring back up the PowerPoint. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions, need to get in touch, would like more information about other Unanet functionality, give me a call or shoot me an email. I'll be happy to get you those answers. But with that, I will turn it back to Sue, and have a great day, everybody.